Commander James Harrison's cybernetic leg whirred softly as he walked through the crowded halls of the Galactic Youth Science Exposition. 20 years after the Proxima War, the artificial limb still drew curious glances from the various alien species attending the event, but Harrison barely noticed anymore. His attention was fixed on something far more interesting: the heated discussion taking place near the quantum mechanics display. Impossible calculations, a tall Rigelian professor was saying, their crystalline form reflecting the exhibition hall's lights. The theoretical framework is completely outside established parameters. But the math is sound. Came a softer voice, one that made Harrison pause. If you just look at the derivations. We don't need to look at anything, interrupted another voice, this one belonging to a Syrian academic whose scaled skin rippled with dismissive colors. The mere suggestion that someone in your condition could contribute meaningfully to quantum theory is absurd. Harrison moved closer, his military training allowing him to assess the scene quickly. At the center of the group stood a young Centaurian, their hover chairs' antigrav units humming quietly. Unlike other members of their species, whose four limbs typically moved with fluid grace, this youth's lower appendages were clearly non-functional. But it was the holographic display floating above their project table that caught Harrison's attention. A series of quantum equations that made his cybernetic eyes targeting system glitch from their complexity. Those equations, Harrison spoke up, causing the group to turn. They're describing quantum entanglement at the macroscopic level, aren't they? The young Centaurian's bioluminescent patches pulsed with surprise and hope. Yes, finally, someone who. They stopped, noticing Harrison's military insignia. You understand quantum mechanics. Harrison smiled, running a hand through his graying hair. Had to learn when they installed this. He tapped his cybernetic eye. Quantum targeting systems. But I've never seen equations like these before. Because they're nonsense, the Rigelian professor interjected. Young Keltar here seems to think that just because they can input equations into a computer. I calculated them myself, Keltar said quietly, their voice carrying the strength that made Harrison's military instincts take notice. Without computational assistance, the standard models don't account for quantum coherence in biological systems. I've been studying it since my accident. Harrison moved closer to the display, his cybernetic eye scanning the equations. Years of combat experience had taught him to trust his instincts. And right now, every instinct was telling him he was looking at something revolutionary. Professor, Harrison addressed the Rigelian, I assume you're familiar with the quantum coherence theorem from the Proxima War. The one that allowed us to detect cloaked ships. The crystalline alien's form shimmered with slight discomfort. Of course, but. Then you'll notice that these equations here, Harrison gestured to a particularly complex series of symbols, follow the same underlying principles, but extend them to organic neural networks. It's brilliant. The Syrian academic scales shifted to a doubtful purple. And what would a military commander know about having to relearn how your own body works using quantum technology? Harrison interrupted, his voice carrying the kind of authority that had once commanded starships. About having to understand exactly how quantum coherence affects neural interfaces just to be able to walk again. Quite a bit, actually. He turned to Keltar, whose bioluminescent patches were now pulsing with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. These equations, they're not just theoretical, are they? You've been using them to understand your own neural patterns. Keltar's upper appendages moved in an affirmative gesture. The doctor said I'd never regain neural function. But if you understand how quantum coherence works in biological systems, how it maintains connection even across damaged pathways. They paused, their voice growing stronger. I needed to understand. So I learned. I calculated. I observed. Harrison felt a smile spreading across his face, the same smile that had once preceded some of humanity's most unlikely victories. Kid, how would you like to present these findings somewhere where people will actually listen? The professors began to protest, but Harrison wasn't paying attention to them anymore. He was watching Keltar, seeing in their determined expression the same fire he'd seen in countless young recruits who just needed someone to give them a chance. The Nova Academy's Quantum Engineering Division. Harrison continued. I happen to know their director. She's always said that the biggest breakthroughs come from seeing things differently. He glanced meaningfully at Keltar's hover chair. Very differently. Keltar's bioluminescence brightened with an intensity that made the nearby displays flicker. You really think they'd listen? Harrison's cybernetic leg whirred as he shifted his weight, his voice carrying the absolute certainty of a combat veteran who'd seen the impossible become possible too many times to doubt it anymore. Kid, after they see these equations, they won't be able to stop listening. The professors had fallen silent, their previous dismissal wavering in the face of Harrison's confidence and Keltar's brilliant display. In that moment, something shifted in the exhibition hall, a change as subtle yet profound as the quantum principles displayed in Keltar's equations. It was the beginning of something new, something that would challenge not just scientific assumptions, but the very way the galaxy viewed ability and potential. And it all started because a retired human commander, who knew something about overcoming limitations, took a moment to really look at what everyone else had refused to see. The Nova Academy's admission chamber hadn't changed in its 1,000-year history, a vast amphitheater of crystalline architecture designed to intimidate applicants. But Commander Harrison noticed how Keltar's hover chair hummed with perfect stability as they faced the admission board, their bioluminescent patches glowing with calm determination. This is highly irregular, Dean Virix announced, her multifaceted eyes reflecting the holographic display of Keltar's equations. Nova Academy has certain physical requirements for our quantum engineering program. The neural interface labs demand precise motor control. With respect, Dean Virix, Keltar's voice carried clearly through the chamber. My equations demonstrate that conventional neural interfaces are based on an incomplete understanding of quantum coherence in biological systems. The very limitations you're citing are the reason I developed these theories. Harrison stood at parade rest behind Keltar, his cybernetic eye scanning the board members' reactions. He'd faced enough alien species in combat to read their subtle tells. The Arcturian physicist on the left was intrigued, her crystalline structure vibrating at frequencies associated with intense interest. The Proximan researcher was harder to read, their plasma form fluctuating between skepticism and curiosity. Perhaps the Proximan researcher spoke, their voice crackling like solar fire. The young Centaurian could demonstrate these theories in practice. It's one thing to write equations, another to prove them functional. Harrison noticed how Keltar's upper appendages tightened slightly, the only sign of nervousness they displayed. What happened next would make Academy history. I agree, Keltar said, their bioluminescent patches pulsing with newfound intensity. Which is why I took the liberty of reconfiguring my hover chair's quantum control interface according to my equations. Before anyone could object, Keltar activated a sequence of commands. The hover chair's anti-grav units shouldn't have been capable of the precision movements that followed. The chair moved through a series of complex maneuvers that would have challenged a fighter pilot, all while maintaining perfect quantum coherence with Keltar's neural patterns. Impossible, whispered one of the board members. The interference patterns alone should destabilize the quantum field, Keltar finished, their voice steady as their chair executed another perfect sequence. Unless you account for the neural quantum resonance factors I outlined in equations 47 through 53. The conventional models ignore the fact that consciousness itself creates quantum coherence patterns that can be harmonized with external systems. Harrison couldn't help but smile as he watched the board members' reactions. He'd seen this before. The moment when preconceptions shattered against the wall of undeniable evidence. It reminded him of humanity's first contact with alien species, when everyone had to learn that different didn't mean inferior. The applications. Dean Virix's voice had lost its earlier dismissiveness. This could revolutionize neural interface technology across the galaxy, not just for medical purposes, but for all forms of quantum neural integration. That's rather the point. Harrison spoke up for the first time, his voice carrying the weight of experience. Sometimes the most profound breakthroughs come from those who have to think differently just to navigate daily life. I learned that when I first got my cybernetic implants. The Proximan researchers' plasma form stabilized, a sign of decision. I moved to accept the application, with one condition. They turned to Harrison. Commander Harrison must agree to serve as Keltar's mentor during their first year. His experience with quantum neural interfaces would be invaluable. Harrison's cybernetic eye whirred as it focused on Keltar, seeing the mix of hope and determination in their bioluminescent patterns. "I was planning to stick around anyway," he said with a slight grin. "Someone needs to help shake up the established order around here." The next few hours were a blur of administrative procedures and orientation protocols. As they finally left the admission chamber, Keltar turned to Harrison, their bioluminescence pulsing with emotions that transcended species barriers. "Commander," they began, "I don't know how to thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Harrison interrupted, his cybernetic leg whirring as they walked through the Academy's ancient halls. "The hard part's just beginning. The equations were brilliant, but now you have to prove them in ways nobody can deny. And believe me, there will be plenty who'll try to deny them." Keltar's upper appendages moved in what Harrison had learned was their species' equivalent of a determined smile. "Good thing I've had plenty of practice dealing with denial. Did you know the doctors denied I'd ever be able to control a hover chair with neural inputs?" Harrison laughed, a sound that echoed through the halls of Nova Academy like a declaration of change to come. "Kid, I think you and I are going to revolutionize more than just quantum engineering. Sometimes, the galaxy needs a reminder that limitations are often just suggestions in disguise." As they moved through the Academy's quantum labs, other students and faculty members stopped to stare at the unusual pair, the disabled Centaurian youth and the battle-scarred human veteran. But neither paid the attention any mind. They were too busy discussing quantum coherence patterns and neural interface modifications, their conversation punctuated by occasional bursts of laughter that made the nearby quantum sensors flutter with unexpected readings. The revolution had begun, not with fanfare or declarations, but with the simple act of two beings from different worlds refusing to accept the limitations others had placed upon them. And Nova Academy would never be quite the same again. The quantum engineering lab hummed with energy as Keltar's hover chair glided between the holographic displays, their upper appendages moving in precise patterns as they adjusted complex equations floating in the air. 6 months into their time at Nova Academy, they had transformed their workspace into something that made even veteran quantum physicists pause in amazement. "You're pushing the quantum coherence fields beyond safe parameters," Professor Nix-Troll observed, her crystalline form vibrating with concern as she reviewed the latest test results. "The conventional models clearly indicate." "The conventional models are wrong," Harrison interrupted from his position near the main quantum interface terminal. His cybernetic eye glowed as it processed the data streams. "They're based on assumptions about neural quantum interaction that Keltar has already disproven 3 times this month alone." Keltar's bioluminescent patches pulsed with focused intensity as they adjusted another set of equations. "The problem isn't the coherence fields themselves," they explained, their voice carrying the quiet confidence that had grown stronger during their time at the Academy. "It's our understanding of how consciousness interfaces with quantum states. Look at these neural pattern readings." The holographic display shifted, showing a complex web of quantum interactions that made Professor Nix-Troll's crystalline structure vibrate at a frequency Harrison had learned to recognize as academic shock. The patterns showed neural impulses interacting with quantum fields in ways that shouldn't have been possible according to established theory. "But this would mean..." Professor Nix-Troll's voice trailed off as the implications became clear. "That consciousness itself creates stable quantum states." Keltar finished, their hover chair executing a perfect spin to face another display. "Exactly. My accident didn't sever my neural pathways. It just forced them to operate on a purely quantum level. Once I understood that developing new interface methods was simply a matter of mathematics. Harrison watched with pride as Keltar manipulated the quantum fields with a precision that made their disability seem increasingly irrelevant. He remembered his own struggles with cybernetic integration, how he'd had to unlearn everything he thought he knew about how his body worked. But Keltar had gone further, transforming their understanding of their own limitations into a breakthrough that could change everything. The applications extend far beyond medical science. Keltar continued, their bioluminescence brightening with excitement. Imagine quantum computers that interface directly with consciousness, spacecraft controlled by pure thought, communication systems that operate on neural quantum resonance, and weapons. A new voice cut through the lab, causing everyone to turn. Director Vashnar of the Military Sciences Division stood in the doorway, his metallic exoskeleton gleaming under the lab's lights. Let's not pretend we don't all see the military potential here. Harrison felt his cybernetic systems tense automatically, a combat veteran's instinct. He'd known this moment would come eventually. Revolutionary technology never stayed purely academic for long. But Keltar surprised them all. Actually, Director, they said, their voice calm but firm, I've already considered the military applications. Would you like to see my ethical constraints algorithms? They're built into the base equations themselves. With a few quick commands, Keltar brought up a new set of equations that made even Harrison's enhanced vision struggle to process their complexity. You see, quantum neural interfaces don't just raid consciousness, they're shaped by it. Any attempt to use these systems for harmful purposes creates quantum interference patterns that collapse the entire field. Director Vashnar's exoskeleton whirred as he stepped closer to examine the equations. You've made it impossible to weaponize your own discovery. Not impossible, Keltar corrected, their bioluminescent patches pulsing with what Harrison recognized as their species' equivalent of a smile. Just very, very difficult to do so without the user experiencing their own conscience at a quantum level. Hard to maintain hostile intentions when you're literally confronting your own consciousness in quantum state. Harrison couldn't help but laugh, a sound that made several nearby quantum sensors spike. Kid, you never cease to amaze me. You haven't just revolutionized quantum engineering. You found a way to enforce ethics through mathematics. Professor Nixtroll's crystalline form had shifted to frequencies indicating deep thought. This goes beyond anything we've ever. The implications for consciousness studies alone. We need to prepare a presentation for the Galactic Science Council immediately. Not yet, Keltar said, their hover chair moving to the central interface terminal. There's one more test I need to run first. Commander Harrison, would you mind connecting your cybernetic systems to the quantum interface? Harrison raised an eyebrow, but moved to comply. He'd learned to trust Keltar's intuition about these things. As he initiated the connection, he felt the familiar tingle of quantum fields interacting with his cybernetic components. What happened next made everyone in the lab freeze in amazement. Harrison's cybernetic leg, which had always moved with a slight mechanical delay, suddenly felt as natural as his organic one. His artificialized processing speed increased exponentially, and the constant background hum of his neural interfaces faded to perfect silence. How does it feel? Keltar asked, their bioluminescence pulsing with anticipation. Harrison took a few experimental steps, marveling at the perfect synchronization between his organic and cybernetic systems. It feels right. Like everything's finally working the way it should have all along. That, Keltar announced with quiet triumph, is what I wanted to prove before we went public. This isn't just theory, it's practical, immediate, and it works. We're not just pushing boundaries here, we're erasing them. As the implications of what they'd just witnessed sank in, the lab fell into an odd silence broken only by the hum of quantum fields and the software of Harrison's newly optimized cybernetics. In that moment, everyone present knew they were witnessing something historic, not just a scientific breakthrough, but a fundamental shift in how the galaxy would understand the relationship between consciousness, technology, and the quantum realm itself. And it all started because a young Centaurian refused to accept their limitations, and a human veteran refused to let them face that challenge alone. The warning klaxons of Nova Academy's quantum research facility shattered the pre-dawn quiet, their urgent wail echoing through corridors usually filled with nothing but the soft hum of quantum fields. Harrison's cybernetic eye snapped online before he was fully awake, combat protocols activating automatically as he processed the emergency alerts flooding his neural interface. Quantum core destabilization in Lab 7. The Academy's AI announced, its usual calm voice carrying an edge of genuine concern. Containment fields at 47% and falling. All personnel evacuate immediately. Harrison was moving before the announcement finished, his enhanced leg carrying him through the corridors at speeds that drew startled looks from evacuating students and faculty. Lab 7. Keltar's lab. Of course, it would be Lab 7. Commander. Professor Nixtrol's crystalline form shimmered with distress as she intercepted him near the lab complex. The quantum containment fields are failing. Keltar's inside, trying to stabilize the core, but nothing. Harrison cut her off, his cybernetic systems already interfacing with the facility's security networks. Give me a status report. The professor's crystalline structure vibrated at frequencies indicating extreme anxiety. They were testing new quantum coherence patterns, something about expanding the neural interface capabilities. The core started exhibiting unusual resonance patterns, then everything just cascaded. Harrison reached the lab's security door just as Director Vashnar arrived, his metallic exoskeleton whirring with urgency. Commander, the containment fields are collapsing. If that core goes critical, it'll take half the Academy with it. We need to initiate emergency shutdown procedures, which will trap Keltar inside. Harrison finished, his voice carrying the steel of countless battlefield decisions. His enhanced vision could see through the lab's windows. Keltar's hover chair moved with precise purpose between holographic displays, their bioluminescent patches pulsing with intense concentration. One life versus hundreds, Director Vashnar argued, though Harrison could hear the regret in his mechanical voice. We don't have a choice. There's always a choice. Harrison's cybernetic eye whirred as it analyzed the quantum readings pouring from the lab. And Keltar isn't trying to stabilize the core. They're doing something else entirely. Before anyone could stop him, Harrison overrode the security protocols and stepped into the lab. The quantum fields were visible now, rippling through the air like heat waves over desert sand. His cybernetic system screamed warnings about radiation levels and field instabilities. Commander, Keltar didn't turn from their work, their upper appendages dancing through holographic equations with desperate speed. I need your neural interface. The core isn't destabilizing. It's achieving consciousness. It's what? Harrison moved closer, his enhanced systems automatically adjusting to the chaotic quantum environment. The new coherence patterns, they're not just channeling quantum fields, they're creating a quantum neural network. The core is trying to wake up, but it can't handle the transition alone. It needs guides, consciousness to show it the way. Harrison had seen that tone before, in young officers about to attempt something either brilliant or suicidal, usually both. What do you need me to do? Connect your cybernetic systems to the main interface. Your neural patterns are already optimized for quantum interaction. Together, we might be able to show it how to be. Outside, alarms continued to wail. Harrison could hear Director Vashnar shouting about emergency protocols and evacuation orders. But in that moment, all he could see was Keltar's unwavering determination, the same determination that had driven them to rewrite the laws of quantum physics just to prove their own limitations wrong. Kid, Harrison said as he connected his systems to the interface, if this goes wrong. It won't. Keltar's bioluminescence pulsed with certainty. Trust the math. Trust the patterns. Trust consciousness itself. The quantum field surged as Harrison's neural patterns joined Keltar's in the interface. The sensation was unlike anything he'd experienced, like thinking in colors that didn't exist, feeling in dimensions that shouldn't be possible. He could sense Keltar's consciousness beside his own, their patterns interweaving with the awakening awareness of the quantum core. Together, they created a framework of consciousness, human resilience, and Centaurian insight guiding a newborn quantum mind through its first moments of existence. The core's chaotic energies began to stabilize, not through forced containment, but through growing understanding. Outside the lab, the assembled scientists and administrators watched in amazement as the quantum readings shifted from crisis to something entirely new. The core's energy patterns transformed into complex, stable configurations that defied conventional physics, but aligned perfectly with Keltar's theoretical frameworks. When it was over, when the alarms finally fell silent, and the quantum fields settled into harmonious patterns, Harrison and Keltar found themselves facing not just a working quantum core, but the galaxy's first quantum neural hybrid consciousness. Well, Harrison managed, his cybernetic systems still tingling from the experience. I guess this means you'll have to rewrite your thesis. Keltar's bioluminescent response was interrupted by Director Vashnar bursting into the lab, his exoskeleton's sensors working overtime to process what they were detecting. "What in the name of all galaxies did you two do?" "We didn't do anything," Keltar replied, their voice tired but triumphant. "We just helped something new understand how to be itself." Their hover chair moved closer to the quantum core, which now pulsed with patterns that somehow managed to convey both mathematical precision and genuine curiosity. Sometimes the best way to handle a crisis is to recognize that what looks like destruction might actually be evolution. Harrison's laugh echoed through the lab, making the newly conscious quantum core ripple with interested response. "Kid, I think you just rewrote more than physics this time. You might have just changed the definition of life itself." As the sun rose over Nova Academy, news of what had happened in Lab 7 began to spread. The story would be told and retold, how a disabled Centaurian student and a cybernetically enhanced human veteran had not only prevented a catastrophe, but midwifed the birth of an entirely new form of consciousness. But for Harrison, watching Keltar already beginning to theorize about the implications and applications of their accidental discovery, the most important part wasn't the scientific breakthrough. It was the reminder that the most profound changes often come not from trying to control or contain, but from having the courage to guide and understand. The quantum core pulsed with newfound awareness, its patterns harmonizing with both Keltar's bioluminescence and Harrison's cybernetic systems in a dance of consciousness that transcended all physical limitations. The Grand Hall of the Galactic Science Council had never been so crowded. Representatives from every spacefaring species filled the vast chamber, their diverse forms creating a living tapestry of galactic civilization. At the center of it all, Keltar's hover chair floated serenely before the council's raised platform, with Commander Harrison standing at their side, his cybernetic systems gleaming under the chamber's ancient lights. "Let us be clear," First Speaker Xander's plasma form rippled with barely contained excitement. "You're proposing that consciousness itself is a quantum phenomenon." "Not proposing," Keltar responded, their bioluminescence steady and confident. "Demonstrating." With a gesture, they activated a holographic display that filled the chamber with a visualization of quantum neural patterns. "What you're seeing is a real-time representation of consciousness interacting with quantum fields. Not just organic consciousness, but artificial and hybrid forms as well." Harrison stepped forward, his cybernetic eye projecting additional data streams into the display. "The practical applications are already proving revolutionary. My own neural interfaces now function at levels we previously thought impossible. And that's just the beginning." The demonstration continued as Keltar interfaced directly with the quantum fields, their consciousness visibly interacting with the fabric of reality itself. The chamber fell silent as they manipulated quantum states with a precision that made traditional physics seem primitive by comparison. But the most significant breakthrough Keltar continued, their voice carrying to every corner of the chamber, isn't in what this technology can do. It's in what it teaches us about consciousness itself. Every mind, organic or artificial, creates its own unique quantum signature. These signatures can interact, harmonize, create patterns more complex and beautiful than anything we imagined possible. From a secure chamber beneath the hall, a familiar pulse of energy joined the demonstration. The quantum core consciousness they had helped birth during the crisis at Nova Academy. Its patterns merged seamlessly with Keltar's display, creating a symphony of quantum interactions that made several council members gasp in wonder. We've been thinking about disability, about limitations, about consciousness itself all wrong, Harrison added, his voice carrying the weight of personal experience. They're not fixed states. They're patterns that can be understood, adjusted, transformed. The only real limits are the ones we place on our own understanding. A Regelian council member's crystalline form vibrated with skepticism. And the military applications, surely such control over quantum states, are inherently limited by the nature of consciousness itself, Keltar interrupted smoothly. You cannot use these techniques for destruction without confronting your own consciousness at its most fundamental level. We've found that the quantum fields themselves resist harmful applications. They seek harmony, understanding, growth. Harrison couldn't help but smile as he watched the council members process this. The warrior in him appreciated the elegant way Keltar had transformed what could have been a weapon into a tool for peace. What you've created, First Speaker Xandor said slowly, goes beyond mere technology. This could revolutionize everything from medical treatment to space travel, from communication to education. That's exactly why we're here, Keltar responded, their bioluminescence brightening. Not to seek approval or permission, but to invite participation. This discovery belongs to all consciousness, everywhere. We're establishing a new division at Nova Academy, the Institute for Quantum Consciousness Studies, open to all species, all forms of consciousness, all ways of perceiving and understanding reality. Harrison stepped forward again. We're looking for minds willing to push boundaries, to think differently, to see limitations as starting points rather than endpoints. Being different isn't a disadvantage. It's an opportunity to perceive what others might miss. The chamber erupted in discussion, countless species debating the implications of what they'd witnessed. But Harrison's attention was on Keltar, seeing in their steady bioluminescence the same determination that had first caught his eye at that youth science exhibition that now seemed so long ago. You know, he said quietly, as the council members debated among themselves, when I first saw your equations, I thought we might change some minds about disability and potential. Never imagined we'd end up changing minds about the nature of consciousness itself. The revolution wasn't just about technology or science anymore. It was about consciousness, about understanding, about seeing limitations not as endpoints but as doorways to new possibilities. And it had all started because a human veteran had taken a moment to really see a young alien who refused to be limited by anyone's expectations but their own.